To our surprise, she insisted that the doll was still present in the house. She proceeded to the bedroom, opened the dresser beside David's bed, and there lay the doll. Tim, David, and I share a love for horror movies. One evening, we decided to catch a movie about a haunted doll that was playing at the local theater. The cinema had a surprise event. Just before the movie ended, they strategically placed the eerie-looking doll near the exit, intending to startle and entertain departing viewers. We found this event amusing and thoroughly enjoyed the movie. After the film, hunger struck, and we planned to grab a bite. However, David received an unexpected call from his girlfriend and had to leave abruptly. Disappointed, Tim and I considered having some pizzas together. Nevertheless, the lingering frustration from David's unexpected departure dampened my mood. The fact that I didn't have a girlfriend added to the mix of jealousy and anger I was experiencing. Recalling the spooky doll from the cinema, I decided to buy it and play a prank on David. However, upon returning to the theater, we were informed that the dolls were being disposed of. Disappointed, just as we were about to leave and head towards the exit, a man who seemed to work there quietly approached us and offered to sell it for cash. Ignoring the suspicion, I focused on obtaining the doll and made the purchase. At that time, David was living alone, and his place was our usual hangout spot. We already shared the house's access code among us, so Tim and I let ourselves in, placing the doll on his table discreetly. Satisfied, I went to bed anticipating the reactions that would follow the next day. As expected, I received numerous messages from David, some of them containing colorful language along with several missed calls. I called him, pretending innocence. With a stuttering voice, he began to explain what had happened when he walked into his house. He said there was a doll, the same one we saw at the movie theater, sitting on the table looking at him as he was walking in. He said he almost had a heart attack and began blaming it on us, saying the only ones who had access to the house were just the three of us. "What are you talking about? We just went home straight and slept. You must have been tired. You probably imagined it." We continued to pretend while Tim and I struggled to contain our laughter. He is such a drama queen, we thought to ourselves. However, David was so frightened that he left his bag at home and refused to go back alone, pleading for Tim and me to accompany him. Upon arriving at David's house, he was so frightened that he couldn't open the door. I pushed him aside and opened the door myself. To our surprise, the doll had vanished. For a moment, I was taken aback, but to continue with the prank, I played innocence and said, "Come on, are you playing tricks on us?" Tim, who had come with me, seemed equally perplexed. We entered to retrieve the bag, and there, right beside it, was the doll, not where Tim and I had originally placed it. All three of us were startled. I exchanged glances with Tim, and it was clear he wasn't involved. As the situation grew increasingly eerie, we decided it was best to get rid of the doll and threw it away in the trash outside. The following morning, I received a call from David. He asked me to hurry over, but when I arrived at his place, I found him seated outside, utterly speechless. Inside his house, in the living room, we discovered the eerie doll again. Tim arrived just in time to witness our bewilderment. We were all baffled by what had happened, because we threw it away in the trash outside previously. We immediately disposed of the eerie doll in the trash again. The three of us hastily left the house and sat on the nearby bench for some time without exchanging any words. To ease our minds, Tim finally broke the silence by suggesting David's girlfriend as a culprit. However, this idea was dismissed, as we questioned how she could have known the exact location where we disposed of the doll. We tried to lighten the mood with some silly jokes and passed the time, but we couldn't just sit around all day. We all needed to go back home, but David was too scared to return, so he begged Tim to let him stay over for a night. Days passed without incident, and David eventually mustered the courage to go back home. For a while it seemed the unsettling chapter had closed, yet inexplicable events began to unfold. Unidentifiable shouts echoed. The living room door slammed shut by itself. Phantom sounds of dripping water and clattering dishes emanated from the empty kitchen. These peculiar occurrences foreshadowed the unsettling climax. One fateful day, upon entering his house, David encountered a pair of feet right before him. Assuming it was his girlfriend, his relief turned to terror as he observed a disheveled woman with an abnormally large mouth and unnaturally large round eyes. Her attire was unkempt, and a sinister grin on her face. She greeted him with malevolent laughter, claiming this is her house now and ordering him to leave. Paralyzed by shock, David watched as the woman began an eerie dance, insisting that the house now belongs to her. Unsettled and without understanding the situation, he instinctively felt the need to close the door. However, the woman swiftly held it, delivering a stern warning.
"Don't come back, or I will kill you."
With those chilling words, David fled, never daring to look back. Tim and I urged him to keep his composure. We understood that he was terrified. We too felt an eerie sense as we recalled what had happened the previous day when we visited David's house. The doll was found in a different location, as if it had moved on its own. With David reluctant to return home, we decided to seek refuge at Tim's place. While we were headed towards Tim's place, a thought suddenly crossed his mind. He mentioned a person named Jenny with shamanistic abilities. Not a fully fledged shaman, but intriguing nonetheless. Having met her in the past, I was familiar with Jenny, and Tim reached out to her. The next day, Jenny joined us to investigate the unsettling occurrences. All three of us took turns describing the situation to her. Jenny listened intently and then shot me a suspicious look for a second. I was afraid she might have figured out that Tim and I pulled a prank on David, but the tension lifted when it seemed like she had a more pressing matter on her mind. So we decided to head to David's house to investigate. As we stepped inside the room, an eerie sensation filled the air. The sound of water dripping in the bathroom had suddenly stopped as soon as we went inside. Everything seemed quiet. Jenny inquired about any objects introduced into the house, and I mentioned the doll we had disposed of, and perhaps it must be at a landfill by now, I added. To our surprise, she insisted that the doll was still present in the house. She proceeded to the bedroom, opened the dresser beside David's bed, and there lay the doll. It was a total shock to all three of us. We were absolutely certain that we had disposed of it in the trash. Jenny grabbed the doll out of the drawer and appeared to be saying something, though we couldn't quite make out her words. Next, she grabbed a towel and blindfolded the doll's eyes, securing its hands with a rubber band. She then put it into the black plastic bag and tied it securely. As we waited in anticipation, she explained that this was a temporary solution, and she then suggested a visit to her aunt's place. But first, she needed to trace the doll's origin. We returned to the movie theater where we purchased the doll, but our efforts to recall the staff who sold it to us were in vain. Growing increasingly impatient, Jenny asked if it would be possible to see the CCTV footage, hoping that once we see ourselves, who are more recognizable, and once we find ourselves in the CCTV, then we can identify the person with whom we were interacting. CCTV footage captured Tim and me entering the movie theater. Once in, we were engaging in some conversation with the staff, then a few moments later heading back toward the exit. While on our way to the exit, Tim suddenly lifted the lid of a trash can and grabbed something out, which turned out to be the doll. The footage revealed an even more perplexing moment when I, on the screen, took money out from my wallet and held it up in the air, letting it go as if I was handing it to someone. Obviously, the money fell to the ground. Both of us were then captured on the screen, leaving the premises with the doll. Tim and I were utterly bewildered. The manager and employees exchanged bewildered glances, directing them toward us. Their expressions conveyed confusion, and they looked at us as if we were kind of weirdos. Sensing the awkwardness, Jenny apologized and explained to the manager and the staff that we were probably still recovering from last night's hangover. Despite Jenny's explanation, the manager still carried a suspicious and skeptical look. Concerns for potential legal issues arose. Jenny tried to assure the manager that our intention wasn't theft. We had merely retrieved the doll from the trash. Eventually, the manager seemed to grasp the situation and reassured us that there were no apparent legal concerns. Upon exiting the theater, Jenny proposed that not only David, but both Tim and I might be under the influence of ghosts. She recommended that all three of us should consult her aunt, a skilled shaman capable of dispelling such entities. We gathered into Jenny's SUV with me in the driver's seat, Jenny in the passenger seat, and Tim and David in the back. I took the wheel and headed to her aunt's home. Jenny specifically emphasized her intention to maintain silence until we arrived at her aunt's residence. She explained that if she needed to communicate with me, she would give a gentle slap on my shoulder as a signal for confirmation. Until such a cue, I was instructed not to respond to any sounds or voices. In an additional precautionary measure, she also directed David and Tim not to utter a word under any circumstances. We set off in the car, and to reach Jenny's aunt's place, we had to take the highways. Just as we approached the highway entrance, Jenny's voice from the passenger seat abruptly directed,
"Make a right turn here."
I was familiar with the road and knew that this turn would lead us in a different direction. Also recalling Jenny's earlier instructions, I chose to disregard the voice and continued driving straight towards the highway entrance. Glancing at Jenny and wondering if she had something else to say sent shivers down my spine. She remained silent, gazing straight ahead. As we continued on the highway toward her aunt's place, we passed several exits. At each one, I heard Jenny's voice echoed,
"We should exit here. Where are you going?"
However, I had already made a commitment not to respond until I got a sign from her. I disregarded all the voices. Approaching her aunt's place, we came to a stop at a red light. Yet the light quickly turned green. As I stepped on the gas, my right cheek suddenly stung. When I looked straight ahead, the traffic light was still red and the cars were passing by fast right in front of me. I slammed on the brakes. It turned out Jenny had slapped my cheek to snap me out of the trance I was in. Confusion enveloped me as I was convinced the light had turned green, and the realization of the potential consequences if I hadn't stopped sent a shiver down my spine. Glancing in the rearview mirror, I noticed that David and Tim were slumped back in the seats with their eyes rolled back. Turning back to Jenny, she gestured continue to drive. I realized this was more serious than I thought. We finally arrived at Jenny's aunt's place. She had prepared a small wooden box and some white fabric-like material and red thread-like material ready. When I gave her the doll, she covered its eyes with the prepared fabric, tied its hands and feet with the red thread, and then placed it in a pouch along with a talisman. With a pathetic look, she remarked, "How could you bring such a thing home?" and reassured me that she would take care of the rest and not to worry anymore. After a while, Jenny explained to us in detail. Although Tim, David, and I couldn't see it on the CCTV screen, Jenny saw Tim and me, the tall employee, engaged in a conversation. Shortly after, she saw a woman following the doll we were carrying to the exit, seemingly following it all the way to David's house. According to Jenny, the tall man might have been a former employee who tragically passed away, unaware of his own death, and the woman's identity and origins remained in mystery. The final question remains to this day. How did Tim come to know that there was a doll hidden in the trash can which was covered with the lid? And for me, to whom did I give the money?